Okay, good evening, everyone. Nice to see some familiar faces in the crowd. Welcome to the Midtown Scholar Bookstore. My name is Alex. I'm the program director here at the Scholar. Thank you for joining us here in Harrisburg. We're happy you're here, and we hope you enjoy tonight's event with David Finkel and Alison Dagnes. Before we begin, some quick housekeeping notes as always. One, we have many events coming up, including events with Lisa Scottolini, Eric Larson, Nell Irvin Painter, and more. Please take an events flyer as you leave. And stay tuned to our social media pages, website, e-newsletter for updates and announcements on visiting authors. Lastly, tonight we have copies of An American Dreamer available for purchase at the cafe. David is sticking around for a book signing after the event, and a quick reminder that book sales are so important for authors and bookstores and the sustainability of this event series, so we thank you in advance for your support and advocacy of the bookstore. But at this time, it's my honor to introduce our speakers this evening. Our interviewer is Dr. Alison Dagnes. Alison is a professor of political science at Shippensburg University in Pennsylvania. She is the author of Super Mad at Everything All the Time, Political Media and Our National Anger, Politics on Demand, The Effects of a 24-Hour News on American Politics, and A Conservative Walks into a Bar, The Politics of Political Humor. She frequently speaks on the topic of the modern political media system and its effects. Prior to receiving her doctorate in political science from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, Dr. Dagnes was a producer for C-SPAN in Washington, D.C. Of course, our featured author tonight is David Finkel. David is an editor and writer at the Washington Post. He won the Pulitzer Prize for explanatory reporting in 2006. A MacArthur Fellowship recipient, he is the author of Thank You for Your Service and The Good Soldier. Of course, the book we are here for this evening is titled An American Dreamer, Life in a Divided Country. Ben Fountain writes, quote, "For anyone hoping to understand what has become of America these past 20 years, an American dreamer is indispensable," end quote. We're so very honored to welcome David Finkel and Alison Dagnes to the Scholar. So without further ado, please join me in giving them a warm Harrisburg welcome.
Hi. That was so loud. Sorry. Hi. Thank you all for coming out on this rainy night. Boy, is this book worth it. I can't begin to tell you how great this is. It's an important read. It's a beautiful read. And I feel very lucky that I get to ask you some questions, David. So why don't you, the book is really about a man and his family and his neighbor, and his name is Brent Cummings. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Brent first?
You all can hear me okay? I love those seats up there. That's where I'll be sitting, I think. Rainy night. Like an hour ago, it was torrential, so thanks for coming. That's really, I appreciate it. The book, pardon me, the protagonist is a guy named Brent Cummings. I first met Brent in 2007 when I was working on another book called The Good Soldiers. It was about a unit of Army soldiers who had gone over to Baghdad during the period of war known as the Surge. Kind of a tough moment in the war. They went over in the lost moment. That's what was presumed to be going on, and they didn't know what was going to happen to them. I spent a year with them through their deployment, watching what would happen to them, and I lived next door to this guy, Brent Cummings. Over the course of the year, I saw Brent wrestling not only with the tactics of war or the strategies of war, but also the morality of war. He was a good soldier. He was a good human being. If you fast forward 10 years, and the country in 2016 seemed to have reached a moment not of just a politically fraught moment, but it seemed to be moving into a moral moment, kind of a beginning of a moral reckoning. I wanted to write about this moment somehow, what it felt like, what it feels like to be alive in this time of such reckoning in the country. And I didn't want to write about a politician. I didn't want to write about anyone on the extreme, such as someone who might have climbed the walls of the Capitol trying to make a point. I wanted to write about somebody who wasn't a them, but who was more of an us, if that makes sense. Somebody who readers could relate to and think, yeah, what this person is going through, that's what I'm going through too. And Brent, of course, came to mind because I had seen him wrestle with morality in the toughest of circumstances. And here he was again. And he said something to me at the beginning of this that really made me think this is the right guy for the book. He said, I felt like I've survived one war only to feel like I'm heading into another one. And this time the war is here in the United States. So he became my character, and we've talked about this. I think I want to try to read an excerpt from the book so you'll sort of understand not only how I approach the book, but who this guy is, and then we can go from there. Everything was fraying. That's what it felt like. Brent watched a clip of a Trump rally in Wisconsin. We're going to win 4 more years, Trump said. 4 more years, the crowd chanted. And then after that, we'll go for another 4. And as the crowd cheered, Brent thought, why are they cheering? Have these people read the Constitution ever? He watched clips of windows being smashed and fires being set in downtown Atlanta after another police shooting, of Black Lives Matter demonstrators surrounding some people eating outside a restaurant in Washington, D.C., and trying to intimidate them into raising their fists in solidarity. He went with Laura to Costco. Laura, I'm sorry, is his wife, where a worker approached a woman with a dangling mask and told her that because of COVID, she needed to pull the mask up over her mouth and nose. I don't like your demeanor, the woman said. Sorry, it's just the policy, the worker said. Well, this is ridiculous, the woman said, raising her voice. How am I supposed to drink my water with a mask on? She yanked up her mask, raised the bottle of water she was holding, poured it over her mask and clothing, and yelled, is this what you want? We cannot have 4 more years, Laura said, on a day when Trump was sending out another barrage of tweets, 41 in all. America first, slow Joe, make America great again. I really want someone to tell him that for every all caps tweet he sends out, he will lose 1,000 heartbeats, she said. It was nighttime now. It started to rain, and Brent went out onto his front porch. All during his time in Iraq, he'd held on to a vision of what would be waiting for him after the war. And a porch was always part of the deal, along with his dog, a beer, and a rainstorm. Yes, it was sentimental, but to a man who had been scared sometimes and often lonesome, it seemed a version of life worth defending. If only things had worked out that way. Brent called one of his old soldiers. Hey man, how are you doing? It's Brent. Hey sir, the soldier said. A little thunderstorm going on here, Brent said, in case the soldier was hearing explosions. It was a big thunderstorm, but Brent stayed on the porch anyway. The soldier wanted to know what life was like after the army, and they talked about the meaning of what they had done and the value of it. And then, boom, Brent said, all that goes away. You know, what am I going to do today? So, you know, it's just a weird, anxious feeling, or at least it was for me. Hey, sir, thanks, the soldier said at the end of the conversation. Be safe, man, Brent said, and 10 minutes later, he was still on the porch listening to the rain. Here came a car lighting up the road, turning into the driveway next door. His neighbor Ann, home from another day of nursing the broken. The garage door opened, the garage door closed. Everything was dark again. More thunder. It was turning into one of those nights. He didn't want to go to sleep because he knew the dream would be waiting. And the reason it would be waiting was because he was thinking now about what all of them had been through, including the day he almost died under the fuel truck, the day he almost died when he was waiting for his laundry, the day he almost died in the mortar attack that blew out his window, the day he almost died in the rocket attack that decapitated a contractor, The day he almost died in another rocket attack when the chaplain was in the midst of giving him a haircut. The day he almost died when a roadside bomb exploded just after his Humvee had passed where the bomb had been buried. The day he almost died, which had been every day. 14 months in Iraq and 28 years in the Army, all in the name of defending democracy. Now he wasn't defending it. He was in it, just in time to feel it unravel. So that's the guy, and I like to think he's a pretty good guide to this moment, what we went through between 2016, when the book begins, and 2021, when the book ends, and if I can be so presumptuous, what we're about to go through again in this election.
You mentioned Anne, the neighbor who's married to Michael. And in your coverage of the Owens family and their legacy, you know, when you were just talking, it struck me that all of the characters in this book are looking for meaning in just very different places. And they come out at different ends of the ideological spectrum. They come out at different ends of policy. But within this widening chasm in America that we have today, it's easy to see that what's dividing us is hate and anger and fury. But I think what brings us together, because I really have been wrestling with this since I've read your book, shouldn't be that. It should be our search for meaning. The problem is that some of the meaning that people are adopting right now is very hateful and very hurtful and anti-democratic, and that's difficult to wrestle with. And so if what brings us together, and I think you allude to this in your book, is the personal connection, because Michael and Brent, they're neighbors, they have to talk to one another, and they do, and they try and avoid politics, and I'm not sure if anyone has been in that position where you have friends and you or family members and you are just avoiding the hard subjects. Every now and then there's a misstep and you have to talk about it. But the personalization is what brings us together. The hard part is that everything's so personalized now that it turns the coin over onto its head.
Yeah, there's no clean prescription in this book about how we're all supposed to get along. What there is instead is I hope, an empathetic treatment of all kinds of characters that Brent especially, and Laura, his wife, run into just in the mundane parts of going through life. Because the fact was, for Brent, he was finding more and more that conflict seemed to be anywhere and everywhere, or the possibility for conflict now as things kept getting amped up. The scene from Costco, they just went to Costco, and suddenly it became this debacle of this strange kind of protest. There was a day, heavens, Laura just went to a grocery store, and she was in the deli section, and there were cheese samples, just cheese cubes being given out, and there weren't very many people there. There was Laura, there was another customer, a woman of Asian descent, and there was the woman working the counter. And Laura took a sample and said, "What kind of cheese is this?" The woman working there said, "That's white American." And she said, "Just like you and me." And Laura just, how did this become that? But in ways, and it's not new, it's been there, but these things are now getting amplified to a great extent, and I think this gets to your work, where everybody just seems mad all the time, and to watch Brent, this man who values decency, humanity. I mean, look, if you were to see Brent, if he were there, you would make some assumptions about this guy. He was born and spent his childhood in Mississippi as part of a family that traces back to the Confederacy. He has a pickup truck. He has a dog, soldier. You know who he is. And in fact, he's a little more Republican than Democrat. He's a little more conservative than liberal. And I think if he were here and we were asking him about the policy of Donald Trump, he would have liked a lot of the policy. What he didn't like was the vulgarities, the lies, the behavior of it. It was offensive to everything that Brent was brought up to believe in and treasure and try to emulate. And it was based on the vulgarities and the crassness. That's why he had such a difficult time with Donald Trump, as did his wife. Meanwhile, and I'm sorry, it's such a...
No, this is great. This is great.
But he lives in a lovely neighborhood with a lovely neighbor, a guy named Michael. Michael fell out of a tree 20, 30 years ago. He was pretty high up in this tree, and he came down. He broke his neck, and he's been a functioning quadriplegic since. So Michael gets around, but he's in a chair all the time. And the hardcore, as hardcore as you can be. And so Brent, finally I'm circling back to what you were asking about. They're good neighbors, and they get along, and they help each other, and they avoid political conversation, except one day they didn't avoid. And it's a scene in the book, the day they began talking about Trump's policy, Trump's behavior. Look, it started getting off the rails pretty quickly, and they both realized it. And after maybe 20, 25 minutes, things were really on the edge of getting pretty heated and crossing over a line. They both walked it back. Well, Colonel, it's great talking to you. Well, I always called him Colonel. Well, Michael, great talking to you too. And they stopped the conversation. They continue to be good neighbors. They continue to get along. So my question I was left with is that the model for these times, that you avoid that, or is that and I don't know the answer, but the book, I hope, makes you think about such things. Was that an example of a kind of willful ignorance? That's how we get along? Or do we make decisions? There are other things going on in our lives that we can feel close to people about, and we find that territory, and we get along there, and we avoid this thing. I don't know the answer. I find myself in discussions with people, and when it becomes clear to me that they have a particular viewpoint that may not be in agreement with mine, I want to shake them up, persuade them. But I don't think that's the way to be. But these times, and again, you'll see. Who cares what I think? But you'll see it again and again with Brent. He has to make decisions about how to behave in these times. And he's not perfect by any means, but when do I think about him all?
He's just seems like an incredible person. And you mentioned that Michael calls him Colonel, and he keeps wondering, why doesn't he just call me Brent? And so I did want to ask you about, since you were embedded with the military in Iraq, and you were there for actual bravery, and you know what it's like coming back, and how brave you have to be for that too. What was interesting to me was the relationship between Michael and Brent, where Michael seemed to be fetishizing almost the military service. And when there was a scene in your book where he's rolling along and someone said, "Did you serve?" And he said, "No, I was just an idiot." But I wonder, in the last 30 years, how many times, because I'm sure that was somebody's question a lot. Did you serve? How did you How did you become a quadriplegic? I wonder how many times he sort of wanted to say, yes, maybe. Because if you haven't, then it's distant and it's a kind of bravery that's fake. But I wanted to know what you thought of Brent's rejection of that kind of bravery. Because Brent kept saying, like, just have him, just, why does he keep bringing up my military service?
Yeah. This is not in the book, but you just I forgot all about this. It was a time after the first book, and things were getting pretty sentimental in the country about, service. Thank you for your service. You're a hero. This, that. There were, like, I would go to Washington Nationals baseball games. There's always this well-intended during the game when, I can't remember, after the fourth or fifth inning, they'll bring some soldiers out, and they'll announce, we have some soldiers here, and everybody stands up and starts clapping for these guys, and you'll see people wiping away tears. They don't know these. I've been, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, these are heroes, blah, blah, blah. So I'm on this. This has nothing to do with anything. I can't even believe it. But I get on a flight somewhere, and the captain starts making an announcement. Folks, I just want to say that we have some people in service on board today, and they're American heroes, and I hope you'll join me in a round of applause for our heroes. So as soon as it starts, I start texting Brent and say, so I'm on this plane, here's what's happening, big round of applause for our American heroes. And Brent wrote back right away, well, I hope you're applauding because they are heroes. Then there was another message, either that or they're on their way back to their base because they got drunk last night and they're about to be chaptered out of the Army. Yes. So these guys get it. They know. But so again, it was just decisions with Michael, and let's be fair, Michael was making decisions about how to get along with Brent because he knows that Brent doesn't agree with his version of life, but they were both making decisions about how to behave with each other. And the things they get along about, there are other things going on in life other than this political division. Now to me, that's difficult because it sort of feels like one way or the other, democracy itself is on trial, and I think Brent feels that very strongly. But there are other things in life. There's his marriage. He was getting out of the Army. He needs to find a job. There's a daughter in college who has some real uncertainties about herself because she's trying to find her way, and she's begun like curling her hair a lot and being quite anxious. That's a concern. And Brent and Laura have a younger daughter, Meredith, who was born with Down syndrome, growing up, and they're trying to, what do we do with Meredith? And Michael, this is a guy trying to navigate life in a wheelchair, and he always has a gun, a handgun strapped to his ankle, and another in the basket of his wheelchair because if something happens, if somebody accosts him, if somebody tips him over to rob him or assault him, what is he going to do? How is he going to defend himself? And if you look at Michael's example and you go back to the election of 2016, when he went to bed that night knowing that Hillary Clinton was going to win the election, and he knew that when he woke up the next day, his president was going to be somebody who was going to take away his guns. He would have no way to defend himself. That is Michael's thinking, and Brent would think differently, even though he has a lot of guns. But again, I'm struggling with this. The book. If the book succeeds, because number one, I'm not trying to pretend there's a tidy answer, because these guys don't have a tidy answer. They're still figuring it out, as are we all, and I think that's the strength of the book. The other thing I struggle with is what I was saying before, the way they choose to get along, or the decisions we all might be making as we get along with people, is that the civilized way to be, or are we just ignoring this moment of peril, hoping that it doesn't get any worse?
I was really hoping you'd have the answer, because people always ask me, what do we do? And there really is not a terrific answer.
There's not a clean answer, but I do find myself thinking of Brent and how he's behaved at certain conflict points, and he's behaved honestly, and trying to draw some personal examples from that. But again, if you guys are thinking of reading this book and you think it's going to be a book that has 10 steps for how to get along in the times of such political peril, no. The point of this book is that you might recognize yourself in these characters. They're all treated with, I hope, understanding and empathy, and maybe out of that we can figure some things out for ourselves.
I think one of the strengths of this is pointing out how nobody's really a caricature, right? That it's easy, especially now when media is so fast and everything has to be sort of shortcutted, down to, okay, we understand you. You're a liberal college professor and you think X, Y, and Z, and I got it. And Dr. Robert Schaefer is here. And so the problem is, we're not. We're much more than that. We're complicated people, and to just run with that caricature belies everything else that we are and the experiences that we've had and the people that we love and how we maneuver our way through life. And so as you were describing Brent as someone who other people really mistook him to be a certain way, and making these assumptions and seeing people as caricatures, how unfair that is, right? To all of us who work hard to understand that people are multifaceted and beyond just one thing, right? And so I think that one of the strengths of this book is, I think, one of the lessons to come out of it, which is not to assume anything. And Robert, the reason that I pointed you out is that I know that you are a multifaceted human being, and we cannot just summarize you in one sentence. But isn't that kind of the thing that brings us all together? That everybody has something where someone would go, I didn't know that you rode a motorcycle, Robert. I'm just kidding, he doesn't ride a motorcycle, I don't think. I don't know, maybe you do. Maybe you do. But isn't that the thing that can bring us together, right? The discovering something about other people.
In conversations I've had about this book with other people, one of the things pointed out was, if you go into, let's say you end up in a conversation with somebody and the political disagreement is clear. If you go into the conversation, I keep hearing, and the intent of each person in the conversation is to persuade the other person that they're wrong, then it's a doomed conversation. If you go into a conversation wanting to persuade someone, but there's a corner of you that is willing to be persuaded, then you have a chance at something. But the other thing I've heard that I guess has made the most sense, and I think it's echoing what you said, is if you can find the one thing where you might agree on, then out of that there's a chance to start hearing each other rather than shout at each other. And this is pretty basic. We're taught this as kids, but I'm old enough now to have forgotten most of my lessons that I was taught as a kid, and these have been useful reminders. Now, and it's so stupid of me because I've had these examples at work when I've written stuff or at the Washington Post or the reporters I edit now write something, and they'll, the letters, the responses, the emails can just be so immediately vile. From people who haven't read the story, you mother, it's just everything horrible. And my reporters, what do I do? What do I do? And I say, well, why don't you just write back and don't be dishonest, but just say, thank you for writing. I really appreciate you taking the time to read the article. If you have time, I'd like to know a little more about why you say this. And just that little opening, invariably, the person will write back and say, I really didn't expect you to read my email. And then they move a little closer to a more civil conversation. Again and again. It's so hard to do that when somebody's calling you names, because you want to call names back, right?
Yes, and and you're right. I mean, there's the church expression, it's hard to hate up close, right? And
Yeah, that's
so,
interesting. Huh.
I think that even though it's awful to be called terrible names, and it's very difficult to forgive. But if you have the ability to engage in some sort of conversation, I mean, that's better than, just like in the comments section where you can't respond back. An email might be a little bit better. Is that really the new normal now, though, where that everything, the Washington Post is just going to be deluged with anger? I mean,
Seems to be, right? Right? I mean, the number. There, I was looking at a thing that a poll that came out of Pew Research last year. That somebody pointed this out to me. It's a pretty good poll, like 6,000 respondents, and one of the findings in this poll was that, I'm going to get the numbers slightly off, but something like 72% of Republicans describe Democrats as immoral, and something like 65% of Democrats describe Republicans as immoral. And we're not talking about, I disagree with this person, I find this person unlikable. This person is immoral. And that's, and it's been tracked before, it's a percentage that's rising exponentially. There was another poll about marriage, and of last year or the year before, but this poll said of all the marriages in America, 4% that year, 4% were between a Democrat and a Republican. So yeah, we're in it, man. It's
Wow.
going on.
wait, now still 4%?
4%.
Okay, I have more follow-up questions about that poll, but that's probably neither here nor there.
But even if it's 10%, it just points out that the divisions run deep and they can be defining. But at the same time, I'm looking at you all, and this is an assumption on my part, I'm not seeing a lot of faces that suggest you're the people writing letters all the time saying, you mother. And I don't think that on January 6th, you were climbing the walls of the Capitol because you were that extremely upset. Rather, like Brent, and I think like Michael, and certainly like you and like me, we're all trying to not. There's a thing in writing, the job of a writer is not to judge, it's to understand. And I like that, and I try to bring that to my journalism, my writing, and I ask that my reporters approach stories the same way. The book, I hope, is a document of understanding, and I'd like to think that by your presence, you're interested in the same thing. Not if you want to own the moment, it's almost like owning it through understanding the moment. Does that even make sense?
It does. I don't know about anybody else here. Sometimes it feels very asymmetric. It feels sort of one directional.
What do you mean?
That we're trying to understand, we're trying to build bridges, and we're trying to connect, and maybe it doesn't come back to us the same way because we are called names, et cetera, et cetera. And that can feel very overwhelming. And a guy, I did a talk in New York, and he started crying because he was like, "This is so unfair. I mean, people call me these terrible names, and it's just so unfair. And why do we always have to be the good guys?" And I said, "Well, you know, there's something about Democrats and liberals and Republicans and et cetera. That's just we sort of vibe in different ways." And I said, you know, and then there's that old saw about Democrats bring an NPR tote bag to a gunfight, and you know that sort of like calmed everything down a little bit. But the question didn't really go away.
Oh no, I have a bit of a problem with that. Just in the sense that if you were one of the people on the other side of what you're talking about, the feelings you dug down would be very much the same.
Oh, I don't doubt that. I mean, I've got.
What worries me, forgive me. What worries me, it's not smugness isn't the right word, but there's just something about that feels off to me because it seems to me from my experience of talking to people of all stripes is grievances go deep on both sides.
That is true.
And that we could be having the same talk, and the audience is just as many people here, but entirely of a different stripe, and it would be the same kind of talk because well, for some reason everybody's kind of, not everybody, that's an overstatement, but a lot of people are just feeling so sorely unheard and misunderstood to the point of this overwhelming anger and sometimes vehemence. But maybe we are. And so then you can say, well, it's the other side not hearing me. And they say, well, it's the other side not hearing me. And I don't know. This is not the talk I planned. I'm very sorry about it.
I'm sorry. That's my fault. Okay, sorry. Let's get back to the talk you planned.
No, I've been thinking about this stuff for like 2 weeks of going around and it's just the idea that we're heading into another campaign season of this, and whatever happens in the election, I try to keep opinions out of my work. I don't think this is a controversial opinion to say the election's not going to settle this. Whatever is going on is it's going to go on for at least another cycle, and we got to figure out how we're going to behave during it. Who we're going to be, and maybe that's kind of why I love Brent and I love Laura and a lot of the characters in this book because even if they differ from each other, there are no bad people in this book. There are no villains in this book. There are different versions of struggling with, as you said earlier, a kind of a search for meaning. And now. One last point, you can argue, well, these are some lucky people because we're not, and you all are lucky people because we're not out there just struggling for survival. We have time. We have to contemplate things. What is meaning in our life? Well, shit, to a lot of people in the world, meaning is I just need something to eat so I don't starve to death. But for us, we're in a rather fortunate position to be able to think about how we want to behave, who we want to be, and to go back to Brent, how to act morally. Can I tell a quick story about it?
Yeah.
So look, this isn't in the book, but this is when I started to become crazy about Brent as somebody to pay attention to. We're in Iraq, and this unit is in a terrible forward operating base called Rustamaya, a little east of Baghdad. It's a pretty crappy place, and 800 people in this battalion. They're thinking they're going to win the war. You know, at the beginning when they go over. By the time they come home, 14 months later, they're ruined in a lot of ways by what happened during that time. One of the things that happened early on is they had to take a company of soldiers, maybe 100 guys, and get them out of this fob and into a town called Kamalea, which was a tough place, really restive. They needed to bring it under control. And they found this abandoned spaghetti factory to move these guys into. And they're looking around, and everything looks pretty good. But in the courtyard, there's this kind of manhole cover, and they open it up and look inside. And inside is a bunch of sewage water, poo water. And floating in this poo water is a dead Iraqi. And just floating and still dressed in kind of a white shirt. Not to get too graphic, the head had come off and was floating next to the body, and also the fingers were gone and the toes were gone, and there had been some torture. And so here's this body floating. It's as in poo water. It's as absurd as war can be, right? And what they have to do, they got to figure out how to get this body out of there, because they can't move a company of soldiers into this place with this body floating in poo water. Everybody's kind of joking about it, but not Brent. Brent is taking it seriously to the point where he said, this was somebody's son. He might be somebody's father. He might be somebody's husband. Whoever he is, he's been as mistreated as badly as a human being can be mistreated. And he said, I don't know. If it was my body in there, I'd want somebody to pay attention to me, and we need to figure out what to do about this, because otherwise we're not really human, are we? This guy in this situation, with this level of lunacy, behaving that way, and he did, and he kept behaving that way all through the war, and all of the years I've known him up until the point when I decided to build this book around him. He's not, look, he's not Mandela. He's not a perfect guy. He's got plenty of flaws, but the effort is so genuine to try to figure out how to be alive in these fraught times, that how can you not want to write a book about it?
And I think that is the perfect time to open this up for questions.
If you have a question, feel free to raise your hand and I'll come around with a mic. We'll start in the back.
I'm sorry about the intensity of that last time. It's just,
I want to reflect on your comments about your experience at the Nationals game, your experience on the plane, and the cheering for the soldiers. I think about probably things that we could all agree to about Iraq. There weren't weapons of mass destruction. There were a few 100,000 people dead, and we didn't install liberal democracy. These facts are probably fairly disputable. So we seem to have this compulsion as a society to want to then take these soldiers and put them in a pedestal and cheer for them and thank them. I would think there'd be other messages we would give to them as well, but I'm curious what your experience, having been in Iraq and reflecting on that, why do we as a society reach out to these soldiers or sort of treat them in public the way that we do, as opposed to some of the other messages we might share or give or talk about?
No, you go right ahead. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Don't make me cry. Okay. No, I think you being embedded is perfect. Mm-hmm.
I don't know the answer. I don't know. I mean, it's a pretty sentimental country. Including me, I can get sentimental, and sometimes I find myself weeping over things I don't really understand. But there's something about the music or the moment that kind of overwhelms me, and it's not a bad thing. When people say, for instance, "Thank you for your service," this is not a bad thing. But to the soldiers, I've had so many soldiers say to me, wouldn't it be better if they asked me a question rather than just said thank you? They don't know a frickin' thing about me. They really don't know what I did. And in some ways, it was a version of a soldier. If I say himself, it's because I was around infantry guys. But a soldier privately wrestling with himself about how he had behaved, still trying to work that out. In the toughest moments, did he live up to his own standard? So sometimes it can seem a little banal. Sometimes it can seem overly sentimental, and sometimes some guys can feel a little shaming. But that's how they're receiving it, and I understand that from talking to them. Why people say it? Maybe because I'm trying to puzzle this out. Maybe because soldiers now, it's you volunteer for the duty. There's not a draft, and so you can go into a neighborhood and 100 houses, and you can knock on like 90 doors, more than 90 doors, and the people inside will have no connection whatsoever to them. So it's a them. It's a cordoned off them, and I bring this up because somebody who has read all of these books, 3 books I've written, said, I like all your books. The first 2 though were, this is why I used the word us at the beginning. He said the first 2 they were really good, but they were about them. They weren't about me. And this one feels like it's about all of us trying to figure it out. That is a terrible answer to your question, but
No, I
my
think it's a
answer.
really good answer, because I think that the separation that we have between
Oh, that's really good. Right?
normies.
And you got to say something, right?
Yeah, normies
yeah,
and the
yeah.
military. Like, so, if you don't know anything about the military and you're sort of stuck and maybe you're feeling like guilty, like, oh God, like, what have you done? Because I don't know anything about the military. And so you say, thank you for your service.
I think we've solved it tonight. So let's say
We
you're a
did,
Democrat.
yay!
Let's say you're a Democrat, and your neighbor is a total MAGA guy. Just go up to him and say, thank you for your service, and then see where it leads.
Other questions? Yes.
I'm tempted to take up this theme of the military because I was in the military, but I'm going to leave that behind. Or maybe I won't.
As
Can,
if.
can I say?
As if.
Let me
Shift
say
on the
one
fly.
thing. 2 of my mentors in life, one was a Korean War veteran, another one was a Vietnam War veteran. Both respond to thank you for your service by asking the question, who do you think we serve? We don't serve the people of the United States. We serve the institutions of power in the United States. They don't see themselves as heroes. They see themselves as victims. Victims of an imperialist state that's regularly carrying out acts of military aggression that are criminal. That's how they respond to that question. But I have a question. You mentioned these polls about morality. And 70% of Republicans think Democrats are immoral, et cetera. For me, it raises a question of, do you know what they mean by morality and immorality? For example, some people might think immorality means you're sleeping with the wrong person. Other people might think it means you're dropping bombs on people. Some people might think you're being immoral if you haven't found Jesus Christ as your Savior.
Right.
And other people might say it's immoral for Wall Street banks to destroy the lives of working people. So what's in the background of those polls, do you know?
I don't know, but I don't know because I didn't read deeply enough, or maybe they didn't go in that direction. I don't know. I'd like to suggest, in this case, whatever the particulars are, it doesn't matter. It's the word that matters, and the fact that you're willing to say to somebody, because of an affiliation, he is immoral, then that says a lot. However you want to define immoral, however they define it, calling somebody immoral, that's whatever the particulars, that's a hell of a thing. So I don't know, but this seems to be a case where the word itself kind of runs.
Hi, thank you for being here. I bought this book tonight,
Yeah.
and now I want to buy the other ones that you have up there. I need another book, like I need another bunion on my foot.
Yeah.
But I may buy
That's a
them
good
tonight.
title for my next book, by the way. Another bunion on my foot.
Well, Anyway, I'd like to know is, do you plan to go and write more books from the wars now that are like Serbia and all that stuff? I mean, Ukraine and.
Wait, I missed half of it.
Are
I'm
you?
sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm probably not talking loud enough. But are you planning to write more books like on Ukraine and things like that? Like.
Oh gosh, I don't know. You know, I just I love this group of guys in the original book, and so for the second book, I grabbed the guy out of the first book, and I brought him into the current moment, time, which was people, families, trying to recover from what war can do to a soldier, and so I grabbed the guy out of the first book, and I built the second book around him. In this case, I wanted to write about, as I said, a moral reckoning, and Brent became the obvious character for that. And part of the reason I've returned to that well twice now, and maybe there will be a third time, is the kind of reporting I do it's a really weird kind of reporting. It's not, we were talking about this earlier, it's not reporting where the story has happened and you go do interviews and then you tell the story of something that happened. Nothing has happened yet. You've reached a moment that feels like it matters, and you find a character who seems like the character would be a good way to write about the moment, and then you just plant yourself. And then you go along and see what happens over a year, like in Iraq, or in the second book, it was probably about 3 years in Adam Schumann's story, or in the case of this book, 5 years, until you feel like you have a story to tell that I hope brings to life in an occurring moment in the country. There was a great review on that first book. The guy said, you know, you can take this book down from the shelf like a decade from now and read it and think, this is what happened and this is what it felt like. And I think those are the goals for what I'm trying to do, just this kind of immersion journalism by not writing about myself, not writing in first person, not offering an opinion. We were talking earlier, I think if you read these books, you'll know nothing about me. I don't betray myself in any way. But trying to document for the archives what not up here, but down on the ground, this is what this moment in America felt like.
Thank you. And regardless of what your intentions were and what you ended up talking about, I have thoroughly enjoyed it all.
Well, I appreciate that. And if one of these guys ends up going to Ukraine, well, actually, one guy did go to Ukraine, and he's been there for a while, and he's either pocket dialing me like at 3 in the morning, or he's just drunk as can be, and he keeps calling me, and I feel bad, but I've reached the point where I stopped answering the phone.
I appreciate, Alison, your name check, but I'm really not very complicated. I am a liberal professor. My bag is The Nation, a little more further left than NPR. But I'm a Jewish professor in central Pennsylvania, which is of interest, and that's where I want to go. I taught your book, The Good Soldiers, in my military history classes at Shippensburg, and I did notice, of course, that you are relatively unpresent in the book, as you are saying. And my question is whether you, as a fairly obviously Jewish person from the Washington Post, East Coast liberal media, which for part of the country has meant Jewish media, how you have been received, whether your person, who you are, has affected the way the people you have interacted with see you. Obviously, when you were in Iraq, you were able to, I assume, gain trust because you were there day after day after day after day with more or less the same people. I haven't read the new book, but it's not, I wouldn't think it's the same immersion, even though you're immersed with Brent's family. So can you say something about how your own background affects your interaction in writing the book?
Yeah, I don't think any religion has anything to do with it. I think when I show up, people, it's shifted over my career, but people don't trust journalists. And there's not much I can do about that. When I got to Iraq, like this book, Brent knew me. The trust was there. We lived next door to each other. He saw the way I wrote the first book. So some trust was built in, and I don't think he expected it to go for 5 years, but good for him. He stuck with it. I think more to your point is what happened when I went over to Iraq, and I got there because the battalion commander said, if you can get here, you'll have the run of the place. I promise you that. You can write the book you want to write, and he was good to his word. There were no public affairs on this. I had the place to myself. Just because this guy said, come on over, doesn't mean 800 soldiers wanted a journalist around. And the assumptions about me was that I was, as a member of the press, I was to the left, way to the left, that I had an agenda, that as far as I was concerned, soldiers were a bunch of baby killers and war criminals, and I was there to prove that point. And again, you can't just say, everybody, let's gather up and I'll give you a little quiz in journalism 101. It just wasn't going to happen. So, and to this day, there are guys who don't trust me. I got an email the other day from a guy saying, you made a lot of money off our war. What are you doing with that money? But he hadn't read the books, but he didn't need to. That's a legitimate thing to say. Yeah, I made a living off that. But so what happened? And I think what happened in the second book, and also with other characters in this book who made assumptions about me, is I'm curious, and I think that came through. I was really curious about what these soldiers were going through. If they didn't want to talk to me, cool, I get it. There were other soldiers to talk to. If they were reluctant, we would just begin to have conversations. But the fact that I stuck around, the fact that I didn't just helicopter in like so many reporters did. You spend 3 days, you get the tour of Iraq, and you go home and you get on TV and you're pronouncing, the war is good, the war is bad, the surge is being won, the surge is being lost. The fact that, there was one guy who came through, and we were kind of sitting in the mess hall watching him on TV, and he was pronouncing the surge a success, and the soldiers saying, excuse my language, the fuck does this guy know? We are this surge, and we have no idea if it's a success. And so that's what I'm up against, right? But I did stay, and I think one of the other things that helped. There was a day. You don't just sit there. You go out on missions with these guys, and one mission I was on, and there was a lot of roadside bombs, and the one this day came for the Humvee I was in. So I'm in the back right. There's a gunner. There's a guy in the back left. Driver, truck commander. Right, 5 people. And all of a sudden, boom, light, dark, just what you would imagine, an explosion is. And none of it's making sense, and everything is just this kind of filthy brown color because all this stirred up. And as the dirt settled, and the soldiers were doing the thing that soldiers do, trying to figure out if they're alive or dead, and then getting ready to react, of course, because something had happened, but also checking themselves out to see if they still had their arms and their legs and everything else. And eventually they turned to me. And I was there, and I had my notebook out and my digital recorder on, and I was just taking notes on what had happened. And so I didn't become a problem. I didn't make it about me. I was paying attention to what they were doing, and word spread that that's how I behaved. That helped some people realize maybe the guy doesn't have an agenda, maybe a serious effort here to understand us. And so that book came out, and it pretty much led to the second book, which was about the after-war and families. The trust in the second book was a lot deeper than in the first book, because now these are families in the most private, difficult moments imaginable, the sorest, most troubling mental health issues, suicide attempts, suicide successes. And here's a reporter taking everything in, but that one worked. And this one, which is really so psychologically fraught because now we're seeing people not wrestling with necessarily mental health issues or loud explosions, but just trying to find meaning. Okay? I mean, to get there, and if the book gets there, good for me, I hope it does, but if it gets there, it's because there was enough trust in people to feel that somebody was going to pay attention to their search for meaning. I don't think religion had anything to do with it, but I do think my identity as a reporter, there was a lot to overcome, and I hope I overcame it.
We have time for maybe one more question.
I am capable of a short answer, I promise. I don't know, it's just hitting me tonight, and I'm sorry.
Sorry. I apologize. I don't know if this will be a short answer question. And this is for either of you or both of you. But I was wondering whether you think this Trumpism, post-Trumpism was inevitable given our particular history and division, or whether this is just something we're doing to ourselves, or whether it's going to happen in 20 years or 50 years.
I am, it's the kind of question I'm not very good at answering because there are people far more knowledgeable who can write about those very things and have studied. I mean, my view is so narrow. It's down here, and there are brilliant books out there about the very thing you're talking about in articles. But I will suggest one thing that I heard, and I don't know if it's true, but it makes sense to me, that every 80 or 90 years, we really find ourselves in the midst of something. And it's because you're about 4 generations removed from the thing that had happened that was so cataclysmic. And 4 generations removed, there's no longer the direct association with the thing. It becomes abstract. And out of abstraction, then you're more open to agreeing with things that you may not know history, but you certainly don't have a direct attachment, and that allows a resurgence of things. So I started thinking about this. So you think of this country's history. So there was the revolution, and then about 4 generations later, there's the Civil War, and then 4 generations later, it's 30s, and here comes the build-up to World War II. And then we have the great feelings and victories after World War II in this country. And now here we are, about 90, 80 years removed from that. So maybe there is something to that. Every 4th generation is going to come up. I don't know, it's intriguing. Yeah. So I guess the answer is I won't be here, but good luck in 80 years.
I've heard someone describe exactly what you're speaking of as that we are in, at this moment, a very decadent time in this country where we have so much that we can fight about things that are not real. The idea of perceived deprivation is enough for us to be completely triggered. And so, going back to your book, when Michael is absolutely convinced that his guns are going to be taken away from him, that's a mark of decadence because there's no evidence there, right? That the government, Hillary Clinton never said she was going to take anybody's guns, but that you could be so easily wooed into feeling that the thing that you care about is going to be stolen. That's a mark that something isn't really stolen. Because as Brent spent time in Israel and had friends in Israel and in the West Bank, I believe. That's a really good friend of mine is in Tel Aviv. She's not worried about getting her hands on Wegovy, right? She's not worried about this stuff. She's really worried about her 4 children and having to go into a bomb shelter every day when her 6-year-old has gymnastics lessons. And so I think that you're right. I think it is a generational thing, and I think that we are comfortable. And for some people, the anger does give them meaning. And for the rest of us, what gives us meaning are really terrific books and authors. How was that for a segue? Thank you.
One more round of applause.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. What? Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Allison. Congrats again on the book. We're going to have a book signing over at this table here. We've got books available for purchase up at the cafe. Thanks, everyone, for coming out. Thanks again to Allison for moderating. And everyone, have a good night.